Okay, and Danny, you can see it? We're good?
Yes. Yeah, it's recording.
Okay. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, great. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll get into our introductions in a quick second, but just a note as well before we start, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A feature. Make sure that it's sent to everyone because Danny will be fielding all of the questions for us. So this is Conscious Consumerism, and tonight we're going to be talking about the history of overconsumption in our society. We'll give you a little bit of a psychological background, some theories that explain different things, and the role of social institutions in overconsumption. That includes business. And then we'll talk about labels, commitments, reporting, different things organizations do to convey their sustainability goals to you. We'll give you some quick tips to navigate through all of that, and then also talk to you a little bit about greenwashing, and ultimately end with some takeaways and conclusions that you can leave with. So first, Danny and I are the co-presidents of the Ethical and Responsible Business Network, which is a student org at UW-Madison. We focus on business, sustainability, social responsibility. We do that through our 4 pillars, which are there on the screen: consulting, networking, speakers, field trips. We also have our email, so if you want to get in touch with Urban, join, or learn more about us, you can feel free to contact us there if you have any questions after the presentation. And then my name is Justice Hadley. I am the co-president, as I mentioned. I'm studying marketing, management, and sustainability at UW-Madison and actually graduating in a few weeks. And one of my most recent sustainability experiences is as the sustainability intern at American Family Insurance. My email is there as well.
Yeah. And I'm Daniel Tryba. I'm the other co-president of ERBN. I'm studying marketing with a certificate in sustainability as well. And I have some of my former experience there, more so in the marketing realm. And I will also be graduating in a couple of weeks, which is exciting. Yeah, cool. So let's get underway. Like Justice said, we're going to start with a brief history of overconsumption in our society. This is something that's really often overlooked, I think, and one of the main drivers of environmental degradation in our society. Humans tend to just consume so much. We consume more than we actually need. And the reason for this is that consumption is really ingrained within cultures across the globe. It's predominantly in the US and other Western cultures, but really consuming things has been a part of human history ever since humans were around. But it's grown even more in the past 100 years or so. And really, a lot of this has to do with the fact that humans equate your social level status with the amount and the quality of possessions that you actually have. There's this narrative that was created that consuming a lot brings you happiness, and you have this sense of feeling and acceptance and contentment with having material possessions. And a lot of this has to do with the figure we have on the right, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with and have seen, and that's just Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's pretty popular in psych courses or just psychology talk in general, and it just talks about different needs that humans have in regard to, what makes them happy and what they need to stay thriving. And one of those things is belonging and love needs. And obviously, with this idea of consumption being ingrained and material status having to do with your social status, the sense of belonging is really going to just make you want to consume more. So really the main thing here is that we are hardwired to consume beyond what is actually necessary. And this matter is made even worse due to a number of social institutions within our society. So this overconsumption is actually encouraged by the 3 main areas that we have here. So first, if we look at media, that can be social media, that can be the news, that can be television shows, etc. And they really just reinforce consumer norms and they kind of promote these materialistic aspirations. People post on social media about things they acquire. The show we have here is The Rich Kids of Beverly Hills. It's basically completely designed around these young people consuming things and noting their status because of the material possessions they have. So the media has really perpetuated this idea that your material possessions are what makes you. Moving on, we see the government. There's this reinforcement of consumption through their actual policy. So fiscal policies that stimulate spending in countries in the US where GDP is usually top of mind for head governmental officials, you're always going to want to promote spending in your economy because it bolsters it. and it's what gives you a lot of global strength. So the government is always going to tend to promote policy that actually stimulates spending and consuming and acquiring. And finally, we look at business, which is kind of the main culprit, and we'll get into this in the next slide. So really what this is meant to show is how these dominant social institutions in our society further perpetuate this idea of consuming and really glorify the fact that you should have material aspirations. So moving on to business's role, there are really a number of reasons as to how business has impacted overconsumption in our society. The first, we have the creation of formal credit, so credit cards. So people being able to actually buy things on credit. They don't have that cash on hand, but they can now put it on a card, and it kind of just encourages consumption. So because you don't have to pay for it now, you have a little more incentive to just buy it because you can kind of worry about it a little bit later. This was all something that was obviously created. Credit cards didn't just come into existence. Moving on, we look at another example with product life cycles being specifically designed to be short. So if you look at things like smartphones, particularly Apple and Samsung, the two industry leaders, we see these companies designing their phones to not really last that long, which is kind of crazy to think about when you look at their price points. Apple's iPhones usually average around $700 to $1,000. So these are extremely expensive material possessions that aren't really designed to last that long. So now if we look at the role of marketing, which is unfortunately a big reason as to why our overconsumption exists in our society, we look at two main things. The first is the meaning transfer model, which is the figure on the right. And what this essentially gets at is the fact that good material goods receive meaning because advertisers, businesses, and marketers give them meaning. So these material possessions have no meaning by themselves. They're glorification, and what they mean is all created. So this is just a phone. This is a material possession. There's nothing to it, but there's so much meaning instituted in this phone because of the role of industry leaders like Apple giving it meaning. So we put all of this emphasis on these possessions that their meaning is actually created. It didn't just come out of nowhere. People who make a lot of money and spend a lot of money give these material possessions different characteristics that make them more appealing for consumers. Moving on to the postmodern era of branding, which is around the 1960s to the 2000s, we see the installation of the idea in society that consumers really create and shape their identities through what they consume. So consumers have even more of an incentive to consume more because they have this idea that what they consume defines them, and they can reshape their identity, they can reshape who they are, they can reshape what they mean through the things they consume. So I want to be an avid outdoorsman. I'm going to buy Patagonia and I'm going to buy Columbia, and I want to show off that I can create myself into this, material being by what I put on my body. So this idea was really created and popularized by marketers. So moving on, we see some companies that are actually kind of deviating from the norm. It's not really common, obviously, because companies are typically, a lot of them exist to turn a profit. But we have two examples here of companies kind of going against the norm, and that's REI and Patagonia. So on the left, REI has this opt outside campaign, and it really initially started as them closing the doors on Black Friday. So everyone knows Black Friday. It's absolutely just ingrained within our culture that we should go out and spend and consume because it's almost a holiday now. It's just ingrained within our society. So REI kind of stepped away from this, and they created this campaign to close their doors on Black Friday and actually remind consumers to rethink their purchasing and think twice if they actually need that good. And this campaign has really grown into a whole movement centering around educating people about circular economies and really encouraging action against environmental degradation. The example on the right is an ad that Patagonia actually ran around Black Friday in 2011. And as you can see, it says, "Don't buy this jacket." So they're actually encouraging consumers not to buy the jacket. They're encouraging them to rethink if they actually need to purchase that good. And they're reminding them of the environmental impact that a purchase such as that jacket has. So it's really refreshing to see these companies take a different approach to consumption and recognize the impact that both they have and their consumers have on the environmental degradation.
Yeah, and as some of you might know, that Patagonia ad actually was really successful. Kind of it, not the ways that they intended, but a lot of those reasons have to do with psychological concepts that are pretty well documented. And you may always be trying to perform in a way that is most in line with sustainability, but it might not always come to be that way, or you might see people that preach sustainability but don't always shop the same way, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We'll call attention to a few here. One is positive illusion, which is the idea that people view themselves more positively than others and can contribute to unrealistic optimism for the future. So that can actually be really good when you're shopping for sustainability. It promotes the idea that your purchases can make a huge difference. But status quo bias also, which is the tendency of people to prefer things to stay the same by doing nothing. So you might acknowledge, or other people might acknowledge, all of these sustainability issues, but might not be willing to change in a way that's fundamental. You might be able to recognize that a certain store is not following environmental practices, but because you are stuck in your ways, which is not necessarily your conscious choice, that can inhibit the way you purchase. And then probably the most important one that I think we should really talk about is moral licensing, which is when you do something really good for the planet, you give yourself a little break and you can do something maybe not so good. This is often well documented in environmental purchasing. So people might go and buy that Patagonia jacket and then say, well, I can go fly on an airplane to this international destination because I am doing something good. So it's just that concept of licensing that is really important. These are well documented across cultures, so it's hard to always be maintaining this perfect sustainability consumerism image of yourself and of others.
So moving on, with this in mind and with these barriers to consuming responsibly, it's really important to remember that your dollar really is your vote. This is a common phrase. I'm not sure if people have heard it, but it's really this concept that your buying power actually has the ability to influence what these massive corporations do and what products they sell. So if your preferences for a certain type of good or for a consumption pattern in general change, corporations tend to respond to that change because at the end of the day, they're there to meet their end users' needs. So it only makes sense that they would then respond to these needs with their product development. So as I kind of mentioned, the market responds to changes in consumer preferences. So as our society changes to a little bit more emphasis on sustainability and consuming responsibly, we've seen some companies respond to this. It's becoming more and more predominant in our society. Two examples we have here are Colgate developing a bamboo toothbrush. They didn't do this out of the goodness of their heart. This was something that consumers had this need for a toothbrush that didn't use plastic and was a little bit better for the environment and had a better life cycle. And Colgate responded to them. Another example we see that's becoming more popular actually is Adidas's Parlay shoe line. And essentially what this is building shoes with ocean plastics. So Adidas is somehow able to incorporate ocean plastics into their supply chain and actually build shoes that remove plastic from the ocean and put them on your feet. So it's a really innovative concept and idea, but it's important to remember that these ideas exist because consumers are there to buy them. So really keep this in mind when you're making your purchases, that your dollar really does have an impact on what companies do.
And now we'll focus a little bit more on companies specifically and how they make sustainability efforts, make progress, make goals, and how they convey all of that to you as a consumer. And we'll talk a little bit about greenwashing and what you can do to identify it and even call it out. So first, spotting environmental bad can be extremely difficult, especially in situations where you don't have a lot of time. Commitments, standards, reporting, labels, all these words I've mentioned are meant to equip you with tools to make faster and more confident decisions. So I put a few on the screen here. We've got USDA Organic, which is a very popular one, Certified B Corp, even Climate Neutral Certified. These are all labels that are meant to convey a message to you, and you may have seen them, you may know of others. And I think it's really important to acknowledge they all have their own specialties, they all have different traits and different levels of accountability, and they're all somewhat good in their own way, but it becomes a little problematic when we have 458 eco labels in 199 countries and 25 industry sectors, if you can see that up there. So we'll look at a few here, but there are so many labels out there, it is nearly impossible and very confusing for consumers to dig through them all. All of the ones shown here are not necessarily specifically in the US. Here's B Corp, but there are other ones that are more specific to specific industries or specific businesses even. Starbucks has their own cafe practices label. And you might recognize a few more of these. But it really goes to show there's a lot out there, and it's really hard as a consumer when you see all these labels to differentiate between them. So our best advice when you're shopping with labels and commitments is to identify labels you trust. Typically, third-party ratings are going to be more reliable. So that certified B Corp label is usually weighted, or this climate neutral certified label usually weighted heavier than, for example, a Starbucks cafe practices, because when a company is making their own label, it's hard to compare it across industry and different metrics like that. Additionally, we see every day organizations making big commitments. We see carbon neutrality, greenhouse gas emission reduction, different metrics and things people are using to show that they're trying in sustainability. However, oftentimes they might not outline specifically how they plan on achieving those goals. One of those things that we really want to remind you of too is when they're outlining specific plans to achieve goals, that's often the most trustworthy. So we'll look at Microsoft's carbon negative commitment, which actually, if you didn't know, came out in January. Microsoft announced that they are offsetting all of their historic emissions and actually going forward are going to be carbon negative. And I specifically wanted to highlight their carbon negative commitment because, as you can see, not only do they have all of their visuals and graphs in line, they also have specific principles. So the first one's grounding in science and math, and they go through all of those in particular specifically with numbers. They point out their greenhouse gas emission sources. You don't necessarily need to know what all of this means, but just knowing that they're outlining specifically how they're going to achieve this goal is really helpful. And then they talk about how they're going to involve their customers and their employees in their initiatives and how they'll be tracking it and who they'll be working with. That kind of transparency is really important, especially when there's so many brands making commitments. It's nice to see that an organization is outlining specific actions that they're using to achieve their goals. So sustainability reporting, all these commitments are becoming more and more common these days, and organizations reporting their own sustainability data is becoming more common. But it's important to also be able to identify what they're tracking, what they're trying to show you, and what that means. So typically, organizations will report on their sustainability data through a wide variety of different names. It could be environmental social governance, or ESG. It could be corporate social responsibility, or CSR. It could be corporate sustainability, corporate responsibility. We're going to look at 2 examples today of organizations that do report on their sustainability, but it's also important for you to know if you ever want to look into a specific brand, you can typically find them by searching, for example, Target sustainability on the internet. It is important to consider if you can't find a brand or organization sustainability data, what does that really mean? What are they hiding? Why aren't they being transparent? That's important to note. We're going to dive really deeply into Walmart's. We'll quickly show, here's Target's corporate responsibility page. It's organized by all of their different initiatives and it is publicly available. You can find their report in their Future at Heart section. We're not going to dive into it, but it is really important to consider what some nuances may be about Target doing all of these wonderful sustainability things. Target has this well-documented Target effect. People go in and come out with a lot more than they went in for. And can that really be sustainable despite the fact that they are doing all these wonderful things for sustainability? We will dive a little bit deeper into Walmart, who recently published their 2019 Environmental Social Governance Report. So it's split into environmental social governance. Governance is going to be documentation, reporting, government, alignment, things like that. Social is going to be people and communities. And for our purposes today, we'll just quickly dive into environmental. It's relatively straightforward. Walmart has highlights, and they actually have their report as a web page. So that's what we're looking at now. You can also download a PDF copy if you're interested. Looking at a later date. So they have all of their goals outlined on their web page. It's split into categories, as you can see here: climate change, sustainable supply chain, and waste. And something that I think most people are often surprised to find out about Walmart sustainability is they do have their own sustainability index, and they are a leader in their industry in encouraging their suppliers to participate in sustainability reporting of their own data. So that is usually pretty interesting for people because you can't see a lot of Walmart sustainability on the front end. A lot of it's behind the scenes.
Kind of speaking a little bit more into Walmart, it's also interesting to see being that Walmart's entire business model is kind of centered around being a low cost leader, and they're still able to achieve their sustainability goals and invest a responsible amount in corporate social responsibility. So it kind of shows this idea of the triple bottom line, which if you haven't heard of this term before, it's people, planet, and profit. So it's your ability to have a positive impact on the environment, on the community, and also still turn a profit. So this is a good example of, again, a company that you wouldn't think has many strides in sustainability, actually being an extremely responsible global citizen and being actually a leader in their industry for sustainability.
Definitely. And just like Target will call out a nuance with Walmart, they have all these wonderful things, but can their position, as you may know, as a low cost leader, Walmart really tries to be low cost in every category, especially their private labels. So, can that position really be sustainable at that low of cost? It's really interesting to consider that, and neither of us really have the right answer. But it's important to ask those critical thinking questions when you're looking at all of this beautiful put together sustainability reporting. It's all very aesthetically pleasing, very nice, and Walmart and Target both have very specific actions, which we just told you are really important. But can their overall strategy as a low cost leader be sustainable? That's probably the biggest critical question about that. And as we're kind of riling up this skepticism, it is important to always be skeptical, and for good reason. There are organizations that miss their goals. So they make all these wonderful things and then miss them. Nestle and P&G both said they were going to miss their 2020 deforestation goals late last year. Also, it's important to consider, can certain industries as a whole or areas of the economy be truly sustainable? It's definitely a topic for debate. We have the surprisingly sustainable case for coal. Coal has a lot of well-known environmental and health effects that are extremely negative, and it's really important to consider, can all of their sustainability efforts actually outweigh that, or is it still bad and degrading? We ultimately want you to take away to always remain skeptical, even if it's a brand that you know has historically been very sustainable. Really still look into their commitments if you have the chance and have the time.
It's also just a quick note to look at if companies are actually reaching their commitments, and kind of touch on this a little bit, but it's really easy for a company like Procter and Gamble to say that they want to remove X amount of carbon from the atmosphere or prevent X amount of acres of deforestation. They can set these really ambitious goals, but in the end, what's really important is action. So it's really about holding these companies accountable and making sure that, okay, it's great that you're setting these ambitious goals, but are you actually doing anything to strive towards it, or are you just setting an ambitious goal so a news outlet reports on it, or so an industry magazine reports on it, or something like that? So while it's great for these companies to have these ambitious goals, what's really more important is they're actually actively striving to reach them and not just publicizing them for the sake of that good PR, which we kind of get into with the next slide.
Right.
Yeah. So greenwashing, this is a common term in sustainability, especially when you're discussing business and sustainability. And really what it is a business presenting misleading information to the consumer that paints an inaccurate, environmentally friendly picture of their brand or product. So it's a company that's trying to claim that their product is green when really it's not. It's kind of capitalizing on this idea that sustainability is becoming extremely popular in our world and our society, so companies are trying to capitalize on it. An example that we have here is Ziploc, their green sandwich bag. It's pretty intuitive here. Ziploc sandwich bags aren't green. They can say they're better for the environment, but while it may look good, and I'm sure it actually ended up in consumers grabbing that Ziploc off the shelf instead of maybe the Target branded bag. What's really important is to ask yourself, underlyingly, is that product good for the environment? In the case, single-use plastic Ziploc bag is not good for the environment. So can it really be green? And the answer to that is no. So what's really important here is being mindful of companies' commitments, claims, reports, and making sure that they're not partaking in this greenwashing. It's really easy to get swept away in buying a product because it's green, or patronizing a company because they claim they're green. But what's really important is to actually think through that purchase and remind yourself, A, is this something I need? And B, are they really just putting green paint over a terrible product that's not good for the environment?
Mhm. With all of this in mind, we really want to open up a bit of discussion to have all of you share, if you would like, how you've taken steps to reduce consumption or be a more conscious consumer. Danny and I can both start with giving some personal examples, and then anyone's welcome to chime in.
You can
Something
put
I know.
your
Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
yeah, I was just gonna say anyone who wants to give an answer can just post it in the chat and I can
In the Q&A.
in the Q&A, yeah, and I can read it out loud and we can address it. But go ahead, Justice.
Sure. This is also a great point for questions as well. So if you have anything, yeah. So I was just gonna say something I've done personally to reduce consumption is really think critically about what I'm buying, especially once you know all this information about sustainability. Think really critically about each of your purchases and try and check yourself when you're engaging in some of those psychological concepts that we've talked about earlier. And I think it's really, yeah, it's ultimately boiled down to me for, do I need this item? Is it necessary? And if so, how can I procure it in the most sustainable way possible that I have access to?
Mhm. Yeah, I echo everything Justice said. I think what it really comes down to when you're making purchases is actually thinking through it and determining if you actually need it and kind of reminding yourself. I think it's particularly interesting having this the psychological background on consumption and how overconsumption is ingrained within our society. Kind of being mindful of that and reminding myself of that when I'm making purchases. It seems like a relatively easy and straightforward thing, but really thinking through your purchases and determining if it's necessary, goes a long way. And similar to what Justice said, trying to buy goods in the most sustainable way and just really being mindful about your overall consumption in general.
Does anyone have anything they'd like to share or any questions?
Give it like 5 more seconds. All right. I don't see anything. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so Jackson says I buy products that are built to last. That's really good idea as well. It's challenging with products that are good for the environment or that are really built durably because they're often more expensive, and consumers can really get tied up in those initial purchases because they see the high upfront costs and they are automatically turned away. When actually, if you think through it and if you look at, okay, I can buy this maybe this really nice pair of jeans, for example, for $100 and they're going to last me 10 years. Or I can buy maybe this cheaper pair of jeans for $20 and it's going to last me a year or 2 years. So you're going to have to constantly keep rebuying that same pair of jeans when really you could have bought that higher quality product in the first hand and actually both saved the environment and saved money. So yeah, Jackson, that's a really good point.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna add, I think, yeah, even when a company's not a sustainability leader, so to speak, buying something that will last longer is way better than maybe buying 5 sustainable versions of that same thing if it's lasting the whole time. And then, yeah, I think if you have access to buy those big upfront purchases, that can be really nice. And there are wonderful tools like Afterpay on the internet that some companies partake in that allow you to buy sustainable products in a more manageable time frame.
Mhm. And then Heather says, for the past 10 years or so, I've worked on buying as many items as possible secondhand. That's another really great way to curb your environmental impact. Like as we've made pretty clear, humans have a lot of stuff and we accumulate a lot of stuff. So buying from a consignment shop or a thrift shop or St. Vinny's can be a really good way of curbing your consumption and reusing. There's that big reduce, reuse, recycle. A huge part of that is reusing products that still are very usable. They just need a new home. So it's really thinking about how can I buy something that maybe would get thrown out or maybe would find its way in the landfill and actually reuse it versus just letting it go to waste. Brittany says, I try and buy food in bulk as much as I can, reusing old glass containers. It's been difficult lately because bulk aisles are closed down in grocery stores.
Yes, I feel that definitely.
Yeah, that's definitely challenging now, given the current environment we're living in. But yeah, that's another great way. Particularly, using those old glass containers, you're preventing a lot of package waste, which is huge. So kind of looking for options where you can kind of both buy in bulk, you're saving money, but then also you're saving that packaging ending up in the landfill. And also you're saving all of the energy and other inputs that it took to produce that packaging. So a lot of plastic requires oil, petroleum to make, so you're actually helping curb the use of fossil fuels too. So that's a really good idea.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think too, there's bulk buying's awesome, and in a time like now, it's health and safety comes first, and that makes a lot of sense. And there is a lot of wonderful actions that can be taken, especially in food. And food is really hard and very nuanced. There's never really one right answer of how to buy your food or how to get things, but bulk buying is definitely a good way to go.
hmm Yeah. Heather says, I had worked in retail while working on my master's and really saw how much waste is created in the fashion world, and even high priced items quality has gone down. Yeah, that's a really good point too. Not necessarily always associating that higher price point with durability. That kind of takes a little more investigation and maybe brand reputation in terms of quality. That's something that's important to keep in mind too. Just fashion is a really big issue. And I see Emma also commented on fast fashion, which we'll get to in a sec. But fashion has a huge impact on our environment and textiles and apparel. So kind of looking at how can you be more environmentally responsible citizen in that realm can also have a huge impact. And then Emma, I've stopped purchasing from many fast fashion stores and really consider the difference between need versus want. Just invested in a new pair of boots from a sustainable brand. You go, Emma. There you go.
Yeah, awesome, Emma.
Yeah, as I've said, fast fashion is really it's bad if you couldn't guess that. But kind of a good thing is you're seeing a lot of the popularity of these fast fashion companies going down. So companies like Forever 21, H&M, they're kind of losing their steam, and people are kind of being more mindful about the impact that these clothes are having on the environment.
Yeah, and I'm sure most people tuning in have probably heard of fast fashion, but just to quickly clarify, fast fashion is just this idea that we used to make clothing for seasonal cycles. So fall, you needed warmer clothes, or winter, etc. And then fast fashion companies started making something like 60 cycles per year of different seasonal clothing. So they release new clothing all the time and try and make people think that you need to keep buying it. You need these new clothes. And it's really unsustainable, very toxic, both environmentally and socially to all the people involved.
Mhm. Yeah, and Emma brought up another good point too of really considering the difference between need versus want. That can go a really long way. Like I said, it's really easy to get tied up in wanting things. As I said, it's kind of ingrained in us that the more you have and the more material items you have, the higher social class you are, the cooler you are, etc. So I think it's really just thinking about that when you're making your purchases and asking yourself, do I actually need this? Maybe could I stave off purchasing it? Maybe could I buy it secondhand? But yeah, really thinking about need versus want. And then Carissa brought up a really great point too, buying local, reducing transportation. Both two really good, or I guess they're one and the same. Yeah, buying local is really monumental in curbing your environmental impact. She brought it up, reducing transportation. So if you look at food, for example, buying from your local farmers market or maybe a co-op can have a huge impact because it reduces the miles it took for that food to get there, and it also supports the local economy, which is really huge.
Yeah. I'll add too. Food is so nuanced. I'm sorry to be this person. Yeah, food is even local food sometimes can have a bigger carbon footprint than food from far away. So, but the nice thing about local food is it's supporting your local economy. It's like 4 times what would normally go into a product's local economy goes into your local economy. So you're really generating a lot of um, well-being in your community when you shop local, more than just the carbon footprint.
Mhm. And then Heather asked, in your classes, have you studied the Marie Kondo effect and people downsizing their possessions? Um, Justice, have you heard of that?
I not so much named for Marie Kondo, but minimalism has definitely been brought up. Really, the spark joy, finding items that really add to your life, or not necessarily you utilize all the time, but that means something to you. Definitely something that I've documented for sure.
Mhm. Yeah. And then Jackie asked, is greenwashing legal? It's false advertising. There are no repercussions for companies that do it. Yeah, that's a really good point. I can't think of specific examples of a company getting in legal trouble for greenwashing, but governmental bodies like the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, kind of exist to make sure that there's fair competition and fair communication from companies. So it is it's a gray area, I think would be my best way to kind of explain it. I think marketing can be kind of dicey in terms of claims you can make, but there are definitely legal ramifications for claiming things that are green really aren't. Go ahead, Jess.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, there are definitely ways it could be illegal if you're saying things that fall in that realm, but also thinking back to our Ziploc Evolve bag example, there are ways for marketers to get around it. They say 25% less plastic. It's not necessarily a lie, but is that really greener? It's hard to say. So they really rely on tricking consumers. It's not necessarily a lie. And it's kind of nuanced in a gray area, like Danny said.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So it could be produced a little more responsibly, but like you said, it's kind of thinking, can this product inherently actually be green? In the example of Ziploc, no. All right, I think that was all of the questions we got from the chat. Thank you guys for all those questions and comments. Those were really awesome points.
Thank you all for sure. We'll actually just end with some big concluding thoughts and takeaways. First, the best thing you can do as a conscious consumer is to rethink your purchases in general. We have this little thought bubble here, good questions to ask yourself when you're making purchases. Do you really need something? If so, how can you procure it in the most sustainable way that you, of course, have access to and that is affordable for you? And then there's not a correct way to consume. It's important to just feel like you can ask the right questions, and that's what we really tried to do today. We talked about labels, commitments, reporting, and it's really important to feel like you have the power to talk to brands if you need, even if they won't give you answers. So all of these commitments that they're making, you can email them and you can tweet them or do anything like that and ask them questions. As long as you can ask those right questions, they might not have answers, they might not be able to help you, but that's the best way that you can be a conscious consumer. We'll quick to acknowledge we produce this with the Office of Sustainability, so thank you so much, and also with thanks to Facilities Planning and Management and the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. And we also wanted to give a special thanks to a few faculty that are listed on the screen that have contributed to our own understanding of the subject. If you are a student at UW-Madison and you have a chance to take one of their classes, you might be able to learn some things that are similar to what we talked about today. And we'll go back. If you have any further questions, please type it into the Q&A and we will be happy to answer.
We have a question from Savannah. What do you think the future of conscious consumption will look like? It's a tough question. There's an ideal what I'd like it to look like and what I think it will actually look like. I think a positive in this realm is the sense that our society. Oh, this question has been answered verbally. Ellie said. Okay. Yeah, but basically, I think it really has to do with rethinking your purchases, and I think it really has to do with consumers holding companies accountable and being mindful of their purchases and remembering kind of something we've hit on, that your dollar is a vote and your dollar really means a lot. So I think it has to do with kind of rethinking your purchases and consumers expecting more of their companies and the organizations that they give their money to have a better environmental impact. But Justice, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, that was all great. I'll just add, I think too, in our economy, different than other economies that may be transitioning to a more consumeristic society, it's different when we talk about those nuances, but I'll speak specifically to our economy. I think, as Danny and I talked about, sustainability initiatives are becoming so much more common. I think it's going to be easier to consume sustainably, but perhaps less so, a little more confusing when you're trying to do it very critically. We've showed you the sustainability reporting. As that becomes more common, it's very time consuming to really differentiate which companies are doing the best, or if there's a whole industry standard, then they're all doing very well.
And kind of further adding on to that, I think a lot of it will have to do with kind of getting the cost of responsible consumption down, if that makes sense. So if you take, organic food, for example, it's a barrier to a lot of people because of its higher price point generally. But I think we've seen a little bit more in our society. It's becoming a little bit cheaper. You can buy organic food at Pick and Save, for example. Kroger owns them. They're a massive corporation. So these companies are able to use their massive reach and their scale of economy of scale to really capitalize on bringing those costs down to then pass the savings on to the consumer to make it easier for them to consume responsibly. So again, I'm not saying buy your organic produce from a corporate grocery store versus your local farmer market, but it's really important to remember that as these costs are kind of driven down, whether it be organic food or whether it be the cost of companies to use recycled ocean plastic in their products, it's really going to have a large impact on the consumer because it'll make it more attainable and cheaper for them to purchase. See if there are any other questions. I don't see anything else. So yeah, Heather says, I also write to a lot of corporations asking them to cut down on their plastic packaging and if some of the packaging is necessary. Yeah, that's another really good idea. And I think it's important, and Justice kind of touched upon this, but don't discredit the voice you have. It can be kind of tough sometimes to think about writing to a massive corporation as a single consumer, but really your voice can be monumental and can really spur them to think about the actions they're doing. So kind of not being afraid to vocalize your thoughts and remind these companies that they could be doing things better. And if they see that these customers are mindful of this and that the public is responding to it, they'll likely try to follow suit and be more responsible. All right, do we have any other questions, comments, anything else that anyone has? I don't see anything, but Justice, if you want to go back to an intro slide, our email is on there. So if anyone has any questions about Urban or what we do or anything else we talked about in this presentation, feel free to reach out to either the Urban email address or Justice or myself, and we can get back to you on that. But with that, we really appreciate everyone taking the time out of their day to come listen to our conscious consumerism presentation. And we hope that you can kind of use this information to really think twice about your consumption, really rethink and be a more conscious consumer, because everyone here, I'm guessing, is here because they want to have a better impact on the environment, and really rethinking your purchases and questioning whether you need something and being more direct with how you purchase can actually have a monumental impact. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate you tuning in.
Yes, thank you for coming.
Great. Thank you so much to Danny and Justice, our amazing Urban hosts. So we'll end tonight, but we actually, from the Office of Sustainability, do have trivia coming up in about an hour. So if anyone's interested in that, go to the Office of Sustainability Facebook. You'll be able to find more details on that. But again, thank you so much to Justice and Danny from Urban. Thank you, Allie.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, everyone.
At the screen, but I'm realizing that I'm not even on video. Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.